classes, and I spent an hour before I came here doing candle pour book 1 of the Fairy Queen. So you go from Poe to Spencer to Faulkner, and I don't know who I am or what I'm doing. So if I start sounding slightly early modern English, it's because Spencer's in my head. And that's compounded by the fact that every time I go from Chaucer to Spencer, I'm angry because I hate to leave Chaucer. And then I read Spencer for 2 weeks, and then I'm so excited that at home I picked up the Fairy Queen, and now I'm reading the darn whole thing again. I'm in the Adventures of Sir Gaia this time. So it's a teacher's dilemma to get yourself in the right mood. The mood for the Fairy Queen is not the mood for Faulkner. I think it's a serious conflict. Let's take a look at Thomas Sutton. 2 elements I want to pick up from last time. One, the sense that Thomas Sutton had a fate. Something was there before the event, essentially, driving him to his horrible conclusion. And attach that to the concept of innocence, and talk about that a bit, because one of the great paradoxes of this novel, it seems to me, is that we have to believe and be convinced ourselves that Thomas Sutton was innocent. And I think when people read the book, and when they're taught the book, they don't ponder what that means, because it's in the context of a society where innocence is an unimaginable term. The whole society is guilty, isn't it? I mean, it's guilty of sin and crime against women and blacks and Indians, and against self as a consequence of that. And the blacks and the women participate in that guilt, so that the very creation of a word such as innocence in this context is ridiculous. This has struck me so firmly because in the Fairy Queen, in book 1, we're dealing with the Red Cross Knight and Una, who is the innocent. She is the holy, the one true church. And she is by definition untouchable by the imaginations and the evil of the villains in the Fairy Queen as they go through it. There's nothing like that here. There's no Una in Absalom. There's no purity that's untouchable. I'm very sensitive to that today because of this curious contrast that I'm going through in my day. Turn with me to this line about his fate for a minute or two. On page 72. We were talking about this 3 weeks ago. Yes, he had corrupted Helen to more than renegadery, though like her he was unaware that his flowering was a force blooming too, and that while he was still playing the scene to the audience, behind him, fate, destiny, retribution, irony. The stage manager, call it what you will, was already striking the set and dragging on the synthetic and spurious shadows and shapes of the next one. That's been in my mind for a couple of reasons as well. I took 45 seniors to see Our Town, and if you've seen Our Town, I'm sure you all have, who can live to be 15 and not see that play. You know that you have to come to terms with the stage manager there, who's essentially managing the play. My students did not like it. As high school students, they expected a play to be a play with props, and nobody interfering. And so in their journal the next day, I had a large outrage that this man was constantly stopping things just when they got good. But it certainly fits the topic of discussion today, that Sutton thinks that he has made some decisions, right, and that he's going to rearrange life. It's all in the context of the shock that occurs to him when he goes to the house, the big house, and then the Negra says, go to the back. And he doesn't listen to him at all. He gets a willful response. And it's in the context, too, of the lesson that our friend Quentin Compson is going to learn. We'll talk about that at the end of 2 hours. But in summary, what Quentin Compson learns is that everything is connected to everything else. Right? That you can define yourself in certain nice terms. You know, I can say I was born in Wisconsin in 1944. I'm 40 years old. I'm almost 41. I don't like the idea. And I'm the product of my parents and the environment in which I lived. I speak Wisconsinite, whatever that is. And you can go to Yale if you want, or Harvard, right? If you're a Southerner, and say, now I'm going to put it behind me. And you can face someone like Shreve, who comes from Alberta, or some curious place north of the border, and then face not the truth that you can readjust your parameters, but that they go with you wherever you go. And I think that's why I found this book so sad this morning, that Quentin Compson can go out of the South, but he can't I'm going to restructure. I'm going to do my play, essentially, which is what Thomas Dutton said. I'm going to make a play. I'm going to create a world which goes against expectations. Not true at all. Not true at all. And I like that passage I just read. The problem with the drama you're in is that you and I can't see the stage manager. Hal Holbrook is not there to us, is he? And the stage manager in our town, when he interrupts the play, maybe plays the role of the man in the ice cream store, is not the stage manager playing a role to the two young people who are going in there to make up and be friends. You see, I mean, they see him as the man in the ice cream store, Mr. So-and-so, but you and I see that it's Hal Holbrook, don't we? And I think that Faulkner's getting at this concept. We can't get outside of our own play. We can try. Can't succeed in that. And that's really sad when you consider that the play you're in is not Twelfth Night. No, the play you're in is Lear or Romeo and Juliet. It's the only play you're in. The reason I'm asking this now at the beginning is that the question you ask, which is the question at the end of the novel, is why? Why did you kill yourself? You have everything in front of you. You know the old. Whenever you work at high school, you encounter tragedy of this type, and the comment is always, he had a life to live. What a waste, 16 years old, or in Quentin's case, 19 years old. It isn't the life in front of you that kills you, it's the life behind you that kills you. And unless you ask this question when you read Faulkner, you won't understand, because it's not the loss of the future, it's the presence of the past that does somebody in, and it's all over, even if he's only 19. Quentin is not 19, he's 119. See the point? I'll make sure we get that off at the beginning. Yeah?
Well, it keeps reminding me of Julia in Bridesmaids, because when she wanted to marry the divorced man, why? Because I'm a Catholic, I have all these guilt. I could have only been Episcopalian like all my life. I couldn't have been suffering all these.
Yeah, we argue that case at Eastside Catholic all the time. Us, Dick has a tendency to hire Irish Catholics and Calvinists, so that even though we're a Catholic school, we have a lot of guilt. It's a combination that never fails to give a moral context to the world in which you're teaching. But yeah, it'd be nice if you could do that. And right now, teaching Fairy Queen, it's one of the issues of the class, because Spencer is rabidly anti-Catholic. Everything evil in the Fairy Queen is Roman Catholic. And my students are trying to come to terms with that as Roman Catholics. This marvelous piece of creative imagination is an attack on them. No, it's an attack on their ancestry. The issue for them, and is one I address practically every day for 2 weeks, is what do you share in the hatred that Spencer has for Roman Catholicism? My answer is nothing. But I'm lying when I say that if I'm speaking in terms of Faulkner. Right? You know what I'm saying? That is, for me, Spencer's antagonism is a product of the late 16th century. Roman Catholics hated Protestants and vice versa. And the first thing I tell my students is that Chaucer was a good Catholic who wanted to reform the church. You're not going to read any more Catholic until you hit Alexander Pope, and he was out of the stream of things. From now on, English literature and the English language is essentially a Protestant phenomenon. And if you are a Roman Catholic who speaks English, you better acquire some Protestant history, because Milton is going to be speaking to you, and Shakespeare, and Spencer. And that's our language. That's our culture. It's very hard for our kids because they want to be on the side of right, but when you're dealing with Edmund Spencer, you're on the side of wrong. Massive wrong. So I tell them, don't worry, I like you, even if I'm not a Catholic. Right? It's easier, it's a lot easier to do this than to do this, for the obvious reason. Spencer was publishing The Fairy Queen in 1590, right? That's so long ago. This is contemporary life. One of the issues we were talking about at lunch today was, well, are they still the Southerners? Yeah, I think they are. I think the pain of Faulkner is just as present in Alabama now as it was when Faulkner was alive. It's only 20 years since he died. And the state of Alabama runs that Confederate flag up his flagpole every morning. That's their flag. You know that, don't you? Which, when I was a kid, was an insult to me. I thought, how do they dare run up a flag of revolution? I don't care anymore. I think I understand more why they do it. Nobody wants to lose. The winners can forget, not the losers. So let's push this a little bit further now. We talked talked about fate and Thomas Sutphen. And turn over to what this means in terms of Sutphen's innocence. So I want to take a look for a moment or two at where we were when the bell rang, where we were when we finished 3 weeks ago. Turn to 217. I think I've got the right page here.
Is that true about Alabama? Do they mean it?
It's a state flag. They made it a state flag, so right there. It's highly offensive to them. But they don't want to lose. Make it 220, that's the page I was looking for. Now here we're getting this interpretation of Sutphen, and innocence is the issue. Right? Sutphen's trouble was innocence. All of a sudden, he discovered not what he wanted to do, but what he just had to do, and had to do it whether he wanted to or not. Because if he did not do it, he knew that he could never live with himself for the rest of his life. Never live with what all the men and women that had died to make him had left inside of him, for him to pass on. There's that sense of the past, you see, which is going to be pointed constant damnation, that I am the consequence of all these people who have a kind of waiting to see what will happen to me, a heritage, an inheritance. Fix things right so that he would be able to look in the face not only the old dead ones, but all the living ones that would come after him when he would be one of the dead. And that at the very moment when he discovered what it was, he found out that this was the last thing in the world he was equipped to do. He did not even know that it existed to be wanted, to need to be done until he was almost 14 years old. Because, next page, middle of the page, where he lived, the land belonged to anybody and everybody. And so the man who would go to the trouble and work to fence off a piece of it and say, this is mine, was crazy. He didn't even know, another 5 lines down, there was a country all divided and fixed and neat, with the people living on it all divided and fixed and neat because of what color their skins happen to be and what they happen to own. Well, that's innocence if you're a Southerner, isn't it? Because it's the very essence of the structure of the culture, that these things are important. I think what innocence means here doesn't mean that he's incapable of evil, but that he's totally lacking understanding of the essential structure of society. Innocence means ignorance here as much as anything else. He doesn't know that being part black means something, because he's a poor white boy from the hills of West Virginia, and that's all it is. And so what Sutphen does is run, doesn't he? He makes a distinction. He reacts in an interesting way in 237. Now we're making a movement into new territory here. This is his emotional reaction to that. Bottom of the page. He never even gave me a chance to say. Do we know what the message is that he brings to the big house? It's totally irrelevant. It could be, tell him I'll be there at 5 o'clock, right? I mean, some ridiculous message from his father. He never gave me a chance to say it, and Pop never asked me if I told him or not, and so he can't even know that Pop sent him any message, and so whether he got it or not can't even matter, not even to Pap. I went up to that door for that nigger to tell me never to come to that front door again. And I not only wasn't doing any good to him by telling it or any harm to him by not telling it, there ain't any good or harm either in the living world that I can do to him. It was like that, he said, like an explosion, a bright glare that vanished and left nothing, no ashes, nor refuse, just a limitless flat plain with the severe shape of his intact innocence, rising from it like a monument. It's a little bit like what James Joyce calls the epiphanies of knowledge, right? When you're going through life, and all of a sudden it dawns on you, something that other people might have known and remembered for ages, an insight. And all of a sudden, something says, I know how wrong I was and how insignificant I was. I like this passage a lot, especially since I've turned to teaching high school instead of college students, because one of the roles of a high school teacher is to tell somebody who's 16 through his relationship to that person, that person is important. Don't do that in college. College students already think they're important. But high school kids do not know for sure that they are valuable. And in high school, we do a lot of patting on the back, a lot of stroking. I like you even if you don't get along with your mom and dad, right? Even if you think other people hate you. I think what Sutphen was getting was the exact reverse of that, which is a shocking insight that he is less than no insulted by somebody, you want to have parity, right? And as you know, when I teach Faulkner, I'm always going back to Melville because I think you see the extension. What Faulkner is not, pardon me, what Sutton is not, is Ahab, who says, if the son insults me, I can insult the son. This is part of the equality of vengeance. I can fight back, even if it just means striking through. I can die like a hero. And you can claim heroic grandeur through your posture. This is the one ability to go down in flames that all human beings have, to be heroes. And so Ahab says, I will be a hero. I will fight back. And the insight that Sutton gets is that he can't. Sutton is not a hero. He's not going to go down tied to the back of Moby Dick. He's going to have his head cut off by a scythe. I don't think it actually is cut off. He's going to be killed by a scythe, wielded by a poor white fool that he's insulted without even knowing that he's insulted the man. Right? So heroism is not available. It's not an option to him. The insight he gets as a little boy is true. He is nothing. And nothing he's going to do is going to make him Ahab. And this is a great descent from high romanticism in the 1850s to what we get in the 20th century. The 20th century doesn't make it possible any longer for us to be heroic. Romance has died. We still are in a romantic period, I think, but we've lost the possibilities. So you can't even die in glory. It rises, his intact innocence, rising from it like a monument. That innocent instructing him as calm as the others had ever spoken, using his own rightful analogy to do it with. And when it said them in place of he or him, it meant more than all the human, puny mortals under the sun that might lie in hammocks all afternoon with their shoes off. This is the universal people out there, what the French call homme, the way things are, the people who run the trains, the them. The only way you can even think is in terms of a minor possession, a rifle. Right? But that's the language that communicates to this boy. He thought, if you were fixing to combat them that had a fine rifle, the first thing you would do would be to get yourself the nearest thing to a fine rifle you could borrow or steal or make, wouldn't it? And he said, yes. But this ain't a question of rifles. So to combat them, you have got to have what they have that made them do what the man did. You've got to have land and niggers and a fine house to combat them with. You see? And he said, yes, again. He left that night. He waked before day and departed just like he went to bed. By rising from the pallet and tiptoeing out of the house, he never saw any of his family again. That's a neat passage. You can see the 14-year-old picking it up. Well, what do I do to face and meet and conquer? You get a better rifle, don't you? And so it's clear throughout the novel that Sutton, in spite of the fact that he became an old lecturer and a murderer, never lost that innocence. There's this concept of equality with the man in the big house who could own a nigger to say, go behind the house and come in the back door, is a concept which is strictly based on possession, isn't it? And ownership. He possesses his house, he possesses his Negroes, he possesses his architect, he possesses his wives, and he possesses his children. And if he has a possession he doesn't want, he throws it away. As he throws away his first wife and his first son, and his last child, and his own life. He never understands for a moment that the heart of being alive and being human in any sense of interior value is how you treat the human beings around you, because human beings, for Sutton, are never more than a means to acquire a certain status so he can get on his big horse and ride to a big house and walk in the front door. And that is innocence. I think it's why when you read the novel all the way through, you have an enormous conflict of emotions inside. You want to hate this man. He's clearly, as Rosa Sutton says, the devil. I mean, and I think that, I've never had anybody teach it to me, but I've come to think as a reader that she's right. That if you think of the devil as an alien force which doesn't have explanation in the context of human experience, you know what I mean? The devil is something that doesn't respond to our sense of good and bad. He is just bad. Right? The devil is just, that's the way he is. And when we talk about human beings, we tend to want to talk about them, especially these days, in sociological terms. But you can't talk about the devil. The devil isn't bad because his mommy was not a good mother in raising him. Right? And I don't know if any of you have taught Milton, but it's the big fight in Milton. The kids want to talk about Satan in human terms. And they want to debate whether Adam and Eve had a choice or not. And they want to debate whether God knew about it. And you have to say daily, day after day, boys and girls. Right? Milton is not offering us a chance to say God was right or God was wrong. This is God. He doesn't have to explain why he does what he does. Satan is by definition evil. That's what he is. Right? God created him to be that way. He did. That's what he is. So the kids always want to put it in sociological terms. Well, maybe if we did this to Satan, he'd be a nicer man. No. And I think when Rosa says Satan is the devil, I think what we have to see is that he simply can't be talked about in our terms of failing. Especially when we think about the other characters in the novel who fight in human terms. And that's the way I would like to kind of push our conversation as we go on. You look at all these people in misery, the men and the women, and what you find yourself saying is, I feel sorry for even someone as minor as the old aunt. Remember the old aunt, whose name we never hear about? Who raises the kids in the Coalfield family, and eventually, as I recall, climbs out the window in the middle of the night and runs away with a salesman, right? What was it, a mule trader? Same thing. I was thinking about that when I was trying to focus my sense on the directions I wanted to push, and I thought, why the old lady? Well, what is she doing? You laugh when you read it, and there is a lot of humor in Faulkner. But when I think about what it means in the context of Sutton with these characters around him, I think, 3 cheers, old lady. You didn't let this society get you down, and we don't know whether you lived in misery or joy with your mule trader, but we know that you fought, and it meant running away. And that's when I think, hey, I also appreciate even old Coalfield, whose idea of saying, I'm going to do it my way, in a ridiculous way, was to lock himself up stairs above the store, right? Starve himself to death, essentially. I don't choose to be a victim of the South in the war, right? I have my own standards. I'll go out in my way. And I think when you think of that willfulness of them to be human in their responses, we move ourselves then into someone like Charles Bond. Why does Charles Bond do what he does? Does he know that he's going to die? He knows the odds are pretty good, because he knows Henry, doesn't he? He even heals Henry's wounds in the war, so he can have him with him when he goes back to the house, so he can face the old man and say, you're going to either admit my parentage, or you're going to have not only a son marrying a daughter, you're going to have a black marrying a white, compounding some kind of, what term, what's the language, geometric terms, the unacceptableness. He knows what he's doing. And I think that, like the old aunt and the old Coalfield, he's willing to have Henry with him with that gun, shoot him out of his saddle, because he would rather go down. These are, for me, remnants of the Ahab situation, right? Because Ahab fights against God, right? The things out there that say no to you, and these people fight in a much smaller, more circumscribed area of life. But they still say, I choose not to become what Thomas Sutton is. And the really interesting ones to talk about, I think, especially when you move to it, are what this means. Are the people in this novel who focus on what it means for the women and the blacks. And the women are the clearest ones to talk about because they're the characters in the book. And I'd like to do that with you for a while today, if we can. Let's look at a couple of these passages. Turn to page 109. Even though I have not been teaching Absalom, regularly, this is a passage which I bring into my classes almost every year when we come to issues of relationships between men and women and some of the reasons behind 109. Some of the reasons behind women's restiveness as time passes. Speaking of that, I might recommend to you, since I know you're interested in literature, classic literature, that you get up to the Broadway and see the film version of Bostonians. It's not the most compelling movie I've ever seen, but anybody who knows Henry James or likes reading James would find it interesting. Vanessa Redgrave is wonderful as Olive Chancellor, and Christopher Reeve is a believable Southern gentleman. It's up at the Broadway now. But it's watching something like Bostonians that reminds you why people like Olive Chancellor came to be. This is, I think, Faulkner talking about the villainy that the South has done to women. Let's start off a little higher so we can move into it. Yes, I can imagine how Bond led up to it, to the shock regardless of what kind that Henry would balk at, Bond knew this. In other words, what ceremony is being referred to? That his wedding with? Yes, his first wife. Yes, okay. So it's that he went through some kind of ceremony. And at this point, we don't know that we're dealing with brother, sister, black, white. We think that Henry is probably upset that he has been willing to father a child with a quadroon, right? And fool the quadroon into thinking that he's legally married when he was really not. And the interpretation is that it wouldn't make any difference to Henry whether he was really married or not. Henry's a good, upstanding young white gentleman who, if you say, I marry you, believes you ought to mean it. Much more than that, though. It would not be the mistress or even the child, not even the Negro mistress, and even less the child because of that fact. Since Henry and Judith had grown up with a Negro half-sister of their own. Not the mistress to Henry, certainly not the nigger mistress to a youth with Henry's background. A young man grown up and living in a milieu where the other sex is separated into three sharp divisions. Keep this passage marked because it's really interesting. In other words, is Henry upset that Charles Bond would have had a sexual relationship with a black woman? No. What's he upset with? That he had, yes, okay, that he had made some gesture of legitimacy. Okay. A southern white man doesn't care. Sex is not the issue. Honor is the issue. There are people with whom one can be honorable and people with whom one cannot. But what you do not do is make a claim of honor in an area in your life in which honor is not an issue. And honor has nothing to do with what you do with a black woman. And remember, this woman is 1/8 black. A young man grown up and living in a milieu where the other sex is separated into three sharp divisions. Separated, two of them, by a chasm which could be crossed but one time and in but one direction. Ladies, women, females. The virgins whom gentlemen someday married. The courtesans to whom they went while on sabbaticals to the cities. The slave girls and women upon whom that first caste rested, and to whom in certain cases, it doubtless, owed the very fact of its virginity. Not this to Henry, young, strong-blooded, victim of the hard celibacy of riding and hunting to heat and make importunate the blood of a young man, to which he and his kind were forced to pass time away with girls of his own class, interdict and inaccessible, and women of the second class just as inaccessible because of money and distance, and hence only the slave girls. The housemaids, neated and cleaned by white mistresses, or perhaps girls with sweating bodies out of the fields themselves. And the young man rides up and beckons the watching overseer and says, send me Juno, or Miss Helena, or Chloe, and then rides on into the trees, dismounts. No, it would be the ceremony. A ceremony entered into, to be sure, with a Negro. It's still a ceremony. You pull back and you remember that as novelists, the men in this novel are mobile. The women in this novel are stable. They stand there and the men move around them. Because men have mobility in the South, but women do not. They are what they are. It's very clear that Cassandra, is that her name? Yeah, Cassie, that she leaves the farm only 1 or 2 times in her life, right, when she comes to town. Judith is right there. But there are 3 kinds of women. There are the ladies, the women, and the females. I think much of Faulkner's novels deal with that horrible distinction. The ladies are the white ladies. Give me maybe a white lady. A lady par excellence, by his definition. Untouched. Judith is one, and Rosa. Judith and Rosa are both white ladies. The other ladies, one white gentleman never touches. He marries them, and they produce the continuing line of the white aristocracy. The women are what, by definition, as we see in this passage? He calls them courtesans. Well, how would they fit in society? What kind of woman would be a courtesan? What race? Probably white. Yeah. It could be mixed, but as soon as there's black blood, you're dealing with blacks. Right? So generally, these are white women of loose morals who, when you're in college, occupy your time while you wait for a white lady to marry. And then there are, so you have ladies, women, and then you have females. And the word itself is horrifying. I could even get my high school kids to stand with their mouths open at the thought. A female is what you call any female of any species, right? At least ladies and women are human beings, aren't they? But a dog is a female, and you owe no respect of person whatsoever to a female. And so you get a society where, on the one hand, you've got women who you would never think of treating as though they were human beings, right? I mean, you're going to marry one of them. On the other hand, you have women, females, who are simply animals for your use. And if you feel like it, you ride out on your horse and you say, "Bring me Juno," and you go off in the woods. And that satisfies your need for the day. This novel is about what that does to people, right? What happens to you when you are treated either like an untouchable figure of respect or like, what you want to call it, an animal, right? Where you have no control whatsoever over your body. And as you read Faulkner, you don't have to read only this novel, read other Faulkner. You come to understand that Faulkner says that the consequences of this distinction are destructive in the extreme, not only to the blacks, who are given no respect of self whatsoever by definition. They're just as destructive to the white ladies, not courtesans, right, who at the very least have some control over their bodies, don't they? But to the ladies who are therefore denied, by definition of culture, anything except Rosa's rage. Right? The paradox of this novel is so extreme when you think of it in terms of paradox. Here is this man who is a raging lecher who gets child after child upon woman after woman haphazardly. And Rosa Caulfield, who is our entrance into the novel, is a woman who has lived for 45 years in unrelenting fury at the thought that this man had suggested that they sleep together, right? Who has retained her virginity like the Pope, right? And never refrains from insult. On the one hand, the black slave; on the other hand, this woman who has lost her life. She's a saint of anger. That's all she is. She ought to be hiding someplace in a convent where she can rage in peace and quiet at the spirit of this man who insulted her. And nobody, I think today, reading the novel, can see her as anything except a figure almost comic. Right? I mean, a woman of the 20th century could look at Rosa and say, "Oh, please, give me something else to be outraged by." All you have to do is say, "No thanks," right? I mean, any woman today would simply say, "No thank you, I have other things to do," instead of going home and living in fury. But it has to do with the passage we just read, you see. When he suggests to Rosa, "Let's try it out, and if you get pregnant, we'll get married," what he's doing is taking her down. The phrase people skip over is that this is a one-way road, right? Did you catch the phrase? He says, "It's a chasm which could be crossed but one time and in one direction." And so to a lady, that direction is down. And if you're Rosa Caulfield without anything except position, right? Social position, you're not a courtesan, and you're not a black. When you go down that step, you've lost everything. Because as you know, the only possession of a white man, a poor white man in the South, is that he's not black. Remember Pat and Huck Finn? This incredible, vicious man whose only sense of self is that he can walk up to a Negro college professor from Pennsylvania, I think, and knock him off the street because he's a black man. It's a tough situation. So what is the consequence of this? Let's take a look at what this passage means in terms of some of the women in the novel. Turn to 114. Here's Charles Bond, the phenomenon of the kept woman. Bond expounds on this phenomenon. I guess we should start at 114, about halfway down the page. It's always hard to find a beginning sentence in Faulkner. And no paragraphs either. The bewildered, the for that time helpless, who wanted to believe yet did not see how he could, being carried by the friend, the mentor. Okay, this is Henry with his friend Bond. Through one of these inscrutable and curiously she had seen the horse or the trap, and so into a place which to his Puritan provincial mind all of morality was upside down, and all of honor perished. It would be an interesting scene to see in a movie. Henry going into New Orleans for the first time. We're not dealing with Calvinist America, we're dealing with the most decadent of French cultures, aren't we? A place created for and by voluptuousness, the abashless and unabashed senses, and the country boy with his simple and erstwhile untroubled code in which females were ladies, or whores, or slaves. Looked at the apotheosis of two doomed races presided over by its own victim. A woman with a face like a tragic magnolia, the eternal female, the eternal who suffers, the child, the boy, sleeping in silk and lace to be sure, yet complete chattel of him who, begetting him, owned him, body and soul, to sell, if he chose, like a calf or a puppy or a sheep. You see, when you move into this part of the novel, you start understanding that the South has survived on unarguable distinctions of fact. Right? And it's only culture that survives. There are women, there are whores, there are females. And poor Henry is brought into a situation where there's a woman there who doesn't fit. She's obviously not a whore, right? Because she's attached to one man in particular. Moreover, she lives in comfort and grace and wealth. She seems to have education as well. She speaks French. Henry probably sounds like some pig out of Beverly Hillbillies. The baby of this child, the child of this connection between the woman, whatever she is, and Bond, is a slave who could be sold like a puppy, and he lives in silk, doesn't he? What is Henry going to do with this fact that the world isn't as neatly divided into categories as he thought? How do you treat a woman who expects to be treated like a lady, right? Who sleeps with you like a whore, and who is a slave, and can be sold like a slave? You see how it starts confusing? The categories start confusing. Henry is, it's sad to say, Henry is the product of his father. His father also lives in worlds which are divided like that. The difference is that his father chooses to respond to the world in an overwhelming drive of will. So he doesn't care if Judith Coldfield is a lady. He's going to get her on whatever terms he can, and he'll dominate her. But Henry is not his father in his domination. He is his father in his father's separation of things. And so he's weak and a victim of his sense of the distinctness of society and his inability to do anything about it. So if anybody is sad in this novel, it's Henry, isn't it? Who is driven and forced not only by his father but by his brother into murder and exile at the end of the novel. He's the one who's left, isn't he, when it's all over. And the mentor watching again, perhaps even the gambler now thinking, have I won or lost? As they emerged and returned to Bond's room, for that while impotent, even with talk, shrewdness, no longer counting upon the Puritan character which must show neither surprise nor despair, having to count now, if on anything, on the corruption itself, the love. He could not even say, well, what do you think? What do you say about it? He could only wait, and that upon the absolutely unpredictable actions of a man who lived by instinct and not reason, until Henry should speak. But a bought woman, a whore, and Bond, even gently now, not whore. Don't say that. In fact, never refer to one of them by that name in New Orleans. Otherwise, you may be forced to purchase that privilege with some of your blood from probably 1,000 men. And perhaps still gently, perhaps now even with something of pity, that pessimistic and sardonic, cerebral pity of the intelligence for any human injustice or folly or suffering, not whores. And not whores because of us, the 1,000. We, the 1,000, the white men, made them, created and produced them. We even made laws which declare that 1/8 of a specific kind of blood shall outweigh 7/8 of another kind. I admit that. But that same white race would have made them slaves too, laborers, cooks, maybe even field hands, if it were not for this 1,000. These few men like myself, without principles or honor either, perhaps you will say, we cannot perhaps we do not even want to save all of them. Perhaps the 1,000 we save are not 1 in 1,000, but we save that one. God may mark every sparrow, but we do not pretend to be God, you see. Perhaps we do not even want to be God, since no man would want but one of these sparrows. That's a curious passage, too, when you think about the meaning of it, because what he's saying is that essentially we're taking somebody who, if she were not living here in New Orleans, would be out picking cotton, wouldn't she? This beautiful woman in her silk and her wealth and her education and her beauty would be destroyed, except for about 1,000 men who pull them up out of the definitions of the Henrys and the Thomas Suttons and say, we will treat you like a human being. That's false too, if you ask me, isn't it? She's not given the respect that you would expect to be given as the mother of a child, of a man that you love. And we know she loved him because of the evidence of her actions when she goes to his grave. Interesting problem. But at least he's putting an issue to Henry Sutton that Henry never thought about. Right? That is, what the passage is saying that we just read is that the fact of woman, lady, female is not something given to us by God. It's created to us by men. And if 1,000 of us choose to redefine somebody, we can do it. And once you do that, then your definitions of society become relative, don't they? I mean, they're relative to your preferences more than anything else. Henry, they call him a Puritan, but it's a curious use of Puritan here. Henry, it never occurred to this man. Because if you could take a slave and turn her into the courtesan, the quadroon, what about Juno, the woman you dragged behind a tree? See? It has consequences, doesn't it, for your interior, for the man who's done these things, in terms of the guilt he must carry. The connection between all of this, if you move from the two men to the woman, I think comes clear when you move to a consideration of Judith, who, in my experience, is somebody people just tend to not think about. Right? You read the novel, and Judith is so painful a thought because of her failure to fight. At least Rose is mad. I mean, right? Give her credit. The woman's got a temper. Beyond belief, she's got a temper. But Judith lives in this context of womanhood and never loses it. And yet, once in a while, she speaks out. And it's passages that people tend not to notice. Turn to 127 for a look at this. On page 126, we get one of those time summaries that are useful to asterisk when you read the book and you want to remember what happened in the sequence. And we'll pick up here at the bottom of 126. If I can find a place to begin. She brought, besides her mother's tombstone, she brought to Tom herself in a surrey drawn by the mule, with which both she and Clytie, not Cassandra, but had learned to catch and harness, and gave to your grandmother, bringing the letter voluntarily to your grandmother. Who's the grandmother here, by the way? It's Quentin's, right? Okay, this is Quentin's father passing on some of this information. Who Judith never called on anyone now, had no friends now, doubtless knowing no more why she chose your grandmother to give a letter to than your grandmother knew. Not thin now, but gaunt. The Sutton skull showing indeed now through the worn, the cold field flesh, as though she's being transmogrified or something, right? Transformed into a Sutton. The face which had long since forgotten how to be young, and yet absolutely impenetrable, absolutely serene. Serene. No mourning, not even grief. And your grandmother saying, me? You want me to keep it? One of the mysteries of the novel is why the Suttons have picked the Compsons to be their repositories of knowledge. But they do. And notice this response by Judith, which is one of the painful points in the novel. It's not maybe the most painful moment. Yes. Or destroy it. As you like. Read it if you like, or don't read it if you don't like. Because you make so little impression, you see. You get born, and you try this, and you don't know why, only you keep on trying it, and you are born at the same time with a lot of other people, all mixed up with them, like trying to, having to move your arms and legs with strings, only the same string. keep on trying, or having to keep on trying. And then all of a sudden it's all over, and all you have left is a block of stone with scratches on it, provided there was someone to remember to have the marble scratched and set up, or had time to. If it rains on it, the sun shines on it. And after a while, they don't even remember the name, what the scratches were trying to tell. It doesn't matter. So maybe if you could go to someone, a stranger the better, and give them something, a scrap of paper, something, anything, it not to mean anything in itself, and them not even to read it or keep it, not even bother to throw it away or destroy it. At least it would be something just because it would have happened. Be remembered, even if only from passing from one hand to another, one mind to another. And it would be at least a scratch, something. Something that might make a mark on something. That was once, for the reason that it can die someday. Well, the block of stone can't be is because it never can become was, because it can't ever die or perish. That's the only speech that Jude has in the whole novel, you know. And you read it, and you realize how she tries to find why do you do things? This is good Faulkner, I suppose. You do it because you have to, or because you're made to have to, or because something pulls it out of you, or why does anybody do anything? Right? The hopelessness of, I don't care if you read it or not, but she's saying in her actions, I'm going to die, and I'm going to be put in the ground, and there will be nothing left of Judith, except stone with them. Not letters, right? Scratches. Scratches. Henry James said in the letter to Howells once said, I think that when I die, all I will have is a few scratches that I made on a few window panes. There's nothing thereafter, it's all over. Oh, what an awful image. The sense that, as I read it, and Ahab saying, all right, I'll take on this whale. I will allow my enemy to be this massive white creature. And Judah saying, the best I can do is say, don't even bother to read it. But then saying at the end, I was alive, right? That stone was a piece of rock, and it will stay a piece of rock. It cannot have an existence, right? It wasn't born, it will not die. But I demand to be heard. Now you do with an omen, don't you? Right? Right? Mary, he deserves to be respected, doesn't he? Or can you be a tragic hero of the 20th century? I don't know. But Judith is making a kind of claim, not of heroism, but of pertinence, right? And you read the damn novel, and she's back there in the background. You see her passing, right? Like Madeline Usher in the far end room. You never get a close look at her. And then all of a sudden she comes up and says, I want some. I count. And then you think in your modern terms, do those people in Ethiopia count? We're seeing on the news that night. People who are starving to death right now. Do they have names and lives? And when they die, will their spirit have counted in the spirit of human beings who were on the earth? And don't go out like, you and I go out. I don't know. It's in my mind because Monday I went to the funeral in North Bend. And one of my senior girls, who's an only child, married her mother. Her father died a year ago of cancer. And we went out there and stood in this 20-degree wind blowing off the plain below Mount Si, and put Mrs. Cooper in the ground, and she was 57, and been for a long time. And I walked in this little cemetery back to the car, and as I walked to the car, the gravestones got less and less legible because it's an old cemetery. But the ones near where I parked, I would have had to get on my hands and knees, scrape the moss off to read the names. And the distinction between her grave Monday and the people who are buried then. What claim of value? See, why does Faulkner spend all this time talking about the tombstones? Over and over again, the tombstones, they're falling apart, right? Why does Thomas Sutton have marble tombstones brought from Italy in the middle of the Civil War and dragged by mule and cart all across America when every ounce of horse so he can bury himself under that. Well, part of it has to do with him saying this is the Sutton family, right? When I die, we're going to have a big monument. But part of it is that when you die, you don't want it dissolved. Right? You want something. And he, in his crude way, is saying what Judas is saying. You might think of the long version of the bear when they're interpreting the books. Remember to read that short story by Faulkner. Recreating the lives of people who degenerate into just a name or two, right? A day. Not a day, a year for a bird. Push it on. I'll pick up and we'll look a little bit at Rosa and then go on to Quentin and Shree after we have coffee. So I'll see you then. I don't want to leave the women without getting back to Rosa for a few minutes, so she doesn't get tiring with her anger. But she has a philosophy too, which is one that's pertinent and worth thinking about for a moment or two. It's on page 143, 144. This is Rosa stating, as best as she can, the way she perceives women in the world. This is a nice passage too. Let's start with the beginning of that paragraph. Once there was, do you mark how the wisteria, sun impacted on this wall here, distills and penetrates this room as though light unimpeded by secret and attritive progress from mote to mote of obscurity's myriad components. Whatever that means. Southern ladies talk like that. Question is, of course, that sitting in the room, the wisteria fills it and permeates the air through the dust that's in the room. That is the substance of remembering. Sense, sight, smell. The muscles with which we see and hear and feel. Not mind, not thought. There is no such thing as memory. The brain recalls just what the muscles grow for. No more, no less. And its resultant sum is usually incorrect and false, worthy only of a name, of dream. Interesting, the thought of memory being a muscular reaction, instinctive, as opposed to a matter of will. See how the sleeping outflung hand touching the bedside candle remembers pain, springs back and free while mind and brain sleep on. And only make of this adjacent heat some trashy myth of reality's escape. Or that same sleeping hand in sensuous marriage with some dulcet surface is transformed by that same sleeping brain and mind into that same figment stuff warped out of all experience. Aye, grief goes, fades. We know that. But ask the tear ducts if they have forgotten how to weep. Once there was, they cannot have told you this either, a summer of wisteria, when lilac laughed in the dooryard bloomed. It was a pervading everywhere of wisteria. I was 14 then, as though of all springs yet to capitulate condensed into one spring, one summer. The spring and summertime which is every female's who breathed above dust, beholden of all betrayed springs held over from all irrevocable time, repercussed, bloomed again. It was a vintage year of wisteria. Vintage year being that sweet conjunction of root, bloom, and urge, and hour, and weather, and I was 14. I will not insist on bloom at whom no man had yet to look, nor would ever. Twice is not as child, but less than even child, is not more child than woman, but even as less than any female flesh. Nor do I say leap, warped, bitter pale, and crimped, half-fledging, intimidate of any claim to green which might have drawn to it the tender mayfly childhood sweetheart games, or given pause to the male predaceous wasps and bees of later lust. But root and urge I do insist and claim, for had I not erred too from all the unsistered Eves since the stake? You catch the connection sometimes. This is Rosa's way of claiming what Judith claims in the letter. I may have been ugly, unattractive to men. I may never have had a spring romance, but I claim my right to be a woman, essentially, right? A daughter of Eve. And I remember my spring of wisteria when I was 14. search I do, warped chrysalis of what blind perfect seed, for who shall say what gnarled forgotten root might not bloom yet with some globed concentrate, more globed than concentrate, heady perfect, because the neglected root was planted warped, and lay not dead, and merely slept forgotten. That was the miscast summer of my barren youth, which, for that short time, that short, brief, unreturning springtime of the female heart, I lived not as a woman, a girl, but rather as the man which I perhaps should have been. I was 14 then, 14 in years, if they could have been called years, while in that unpaced corridor which I call childhood, which was not living, but rather some projection of the lifeless womb itself, I gestate and complete, not aged, just overdue because of some Caesarean lack, some cold, head-muzzling forceps of the savage time, which should have torn me free. I waited not for light, but for that doom which we call female victory, which is endure, and then endure, without rhyme or reason or hope of reward, and then endure. I, like that blind subterranean fish, that insulated spark whose origin the fish no longer remembers, which pulses and beats at its crepuscular and lethargic tenements with the old unsleeping itch, which has no words to speak with other than, this is called light, that smell and touch, that other something which has bequeathed not even name for sound of bee or bird or flower scent or light or sun or love, yes, not even growing or developing, loved by and loving light, and equipped only with that cunning, that inverted canker growth of solitude, which substitutes the omnivorous and unrational hearing sense for all the others. So that instead of accomplishing the processional and measured milestones of childhood time, I lurked unapprehended, as though shod with the very damp and velvet flowers of the womb. Well, even Rosa can become eloquent when it's on, if that's eloquence. But if you know Faulkner, some of you are mentioning him to me at break, you know that there's a word there that he uses at the end of the song. As for Dilsey, she endured. Last line of the song. That is, for Faulkner, the one victory a woman has, maybe it's the only victory a woman has, is to keep on going, right? And enduring what the men around you do, and surviving when they pass through their viciousness and their evil, or their triumphs or their good, and maybe like the girl in the novel we just mentioned, Light in August, ride along on the back of the open carriage to someplace else and create. Because what women have, especially, of course, is creation. They create children, and they give birth. That gives them nobility. There's a strong element of that in Faulkner. But Rosa doesn't have that, does she? You see, she is not given that gift. So what she has not being able to create is endurance, and it's the only thing she has pride in. That doom which we call female victory, which is endure and then endure without rhyme or reason or hope of reward. You can connect that pretty easily to Judith, can't you? Because that's what she did. She pulled herself back and said, I will not be driven out. I will take this. I prefer the aunt who gets out the back window and runs away. Because it seems to me that's a kind of victory too. But the aunt gives up her ladyhood, doesn't she? Right? Because no lady's going to run away with a mule seller. And these women are these are the female white women of the South, right? Who can do nothing but endure and don't have the freedom to become the aunt or the courtesan. And so they're trapped, both Rosa and Judith.
I just read a novel a year or so ago, a contemporary novel, and the novelist ended it by saying, and she was a woman, and this was the story of the woman's trials. The secret of life is to endure. I wonder if she got it.
Well, if she's a Southern,
well,
yeah. If she's a Southern writer, she did get it from Faulkner, because it's a theme that Faulkner touches on frequently.
You got it from being a woman.
Probably just being female, you think? Fighting your way through that all. Okay, let's pick it up then and go back by turning ourselves, touching still on Sutton, but turning ourselves this last quarter to Shreve and Quentin, because they're the context in which this story is told. The tragic impulse of the novel has to do with Quentin's need to tell Shreve. And if you remember in chapter 6, the motif that brings the chapter back throughout the whole length is on 174, and it's a phrase that's repeated over and over again, and which becomes a kind of exacerbation in Quentin as he listens to it on page 174. The letter bringing with it that very September evening itself, and he soon needing, required to say, no, neither aunt, cousin, nor uncle, Rosa, Miss Rosa Caulfield, an old lady that died young of old age in 1866, one summer. And then Shreve said, you mean she was no kin to you, no kin to you at all? That there was actually one Southern Bayard or Guinevere who was no kin to you? Then what did she die for? Because that was not Shreve's first time, nobody's first time in Cambridge in September. Tell me about the South. What's it like there? Well, what do they do there? Why do they live there? Why do they live at all? There are 3 or 4 phrases in the novel that repeat themselves over and over. And in the latter half of the novel, that's the one, remember? It's Shreve's continual turning to his roommate, well, tell me about the South, right? The alien asking a question from a perspective which simply cannot ever get inside an understanding of the experience. It's like me saying, tell me what it's like to give birth. Right? I mean, I've been at the birth of 2 children, but I say, well, I've had 2 babies, I've gone through it, and I think I know a lot about it, but I've never done it. Right? And nothing I read about can give me any more than a sympathetic perception, which is far from reality. You're talking about essential difference. And Shreve and Quentin are the same sex, but this is South versus North. South versus Canadian on top of it. Tell me about the South. And what I feel as I read the story is the intense pressure of frustration in Quentin as he goes on. Because the story continues. You learn more. You get the tale of Sutton's death told again, another time, the discovery of his body. And when he's finished, you can see him looking at Shreve, and Shreve saying, well, I don't understand. Tell me some more about the South. And then he says, well, let me try again. As you do when you teach high school, and you tell the same thing over and over and over, and you know that after you've done it 6 times, only 3 kids understand you. And you can't find any simpler words. You can't. And when you're dealing with something as simple as a lesson in class, how do you explain something as complex as the phenomenon with a capital S that's called the South? Well, you can't. And so the novel reaches an intense feeling of frustration at the end. I think readers who say they don't understand why Quentin commits suicide have been reading this with a television set on, because they're not feeling the novel. They may be reading it, covering their eyeballs or going over the pages. But if you don't feel Quentin's frustration at the end, then you've been doing something else than reading this novel. Because if you read it, you know that it is that impossibility to know but not to be able to say. And this is where I think Faulkner often reminds me of Walt Whitman, who knows that for all the words you put down, the secret of the message of Whitman and of Faulkner cannot be put in words. All words can do is give you a direction, a clue, signpost. You've got to go the rest of the way on your own. So let's continue on by looking at this. Quentin starts responding to us as we move on into the novel and get to understand him better. He no longer is merely a translator of tradition. Turn to 245, 246. Oh, I'm sorry, that's Sutphin and Destiny. Did we do that one already? No, we didn't. Yeah, this is the one I wanted to pick up to move into Quentin. We talked about Sutphin and Fate, remember, with this stage manager offhand. Here we pick up this concept again, bottom of 245. Sutphin was talking about it again, telling him again before he realized that this was some more of it. And he said how he thought there was something about a man's destiny, or about the man that caused the destiny to shape itself to him like his clothes did, like the same coat that knew might have fitted 1,000 men. Yet after one man has worn it for a while, it fits no one else, and you can tell it anywhere you see it, even if all you see is a sleeve or lapel. So that is the demons, Shreve said. Destiny. See, that's Rosa's terminology. He's not going along. You see, Shreve is going back using the old language. And Shreve does that not only with that, but his insistence on saying Miss Goldfield or Aunt Rosa, remember? And just irritating Quentin beyond belief that he won't go along and he keeps hanging up on these terms. Destiny had fitted itself to him, to his innocence, his pristine aptitude for platform drama, childlike, heroic simplicity. Just as the fine broadcloth uniform which you could have seen on 10,000 men during those 4 years, which he wore when he came in the office that afternoon 30 years later, had fitted itself to the swaggering of all his gestures and to the forensic verbiage in which he stated calmly, with that frank innocence which we call of a child, except that a human child is the only living creature that is never either frank or innocent, the most simple and outrageous things. He was telling some more of it, was already into what he was telling, and still without telling how he got to where he was, not even how what he was now involved in came to occur. He was obviously at least 20 years old at the time he was telling about, crouching behind a window in the dark and firing muskets through it, which someone else loaded and handed to him. Well, destiny, waiting for him. He says, the interpretation here is that you create your destiny, that your actions. We were talking about something seeing the world, and are seeing the world through something as having a fate out there. Well, the stage manager is pushing it through, and you move towards something that I think was going to push Quentin very seriously towards suicide. And that is that, on 341, that horrible sense of destiny or fate is coming to have a sense of humor. But it's a tragic sense of humor. Return to 341. He is impelled into his life by the occurrence at the big house where he's turned away. And Faulkner and Quentin are coming to understand that that action which creates his motion to his own end is going to be the joke. It's called cosmic joke, I think. It doesn't mean you're supposed to laugh. Pop up 341. Henry would say, but must you marry her? Do you have to do it? And Bond would say, he should have told me, myself. He should have told me, myself, himself. And we hear Bond's desire to be acknowledged. That's all he's asking for, essentially. Acknowledge what we are. I was fair and honorable with him. I waited. You know now why I waited. I gave him every chance to tell me himself, but he didn't do it. If he had, I would have agreed and promised never to see her or you or him again. But he didn't tell me. I thought at first it was because he didn't know. Then I knew that he did know. And still I waited. But he didn't tell me. He just told you. Sent me a message like you send a man, a nigger servant to a beggar, and trying to clear out. Don't you see that? And Henry would say, but Judith, our sister, think of her. Think of her, said Bond. All right, think of her. Then what? Yes, I understand. He sent you like with a message to me, like you send a command, like you send to a beggar and tramp, tell him to clear out. What's the difference? The difference is minuscule. That's the big difference. This is his son, right? The nigger servant was speaking to a beggar or a tramp, wasn't he? When it happened to Thomas Sutton. When it happened to Charles Bond, he's talking to the oldest child of the man whose plantation he's living on. He didn't have the grace even to speak to Bond in acknowledgement of his blood. So whatever it was that drove Thomas Sutton to create Sutton's 100, whatever excuse he had, right, in his innocence, to face a plantation with a plantation, a family with a family, is insignificant compared to what he does himself to his own child. Why does Charles Bond, does he have cause, Charles Bond, to do what he does? And Henry says all kinds of interest. Think of our sister, right? Think of me, I'm your friend, right? Think of the people you have obligated. What does Bond say? So what? This is more compelling in its importance to me than what you are seeing. And so what's the connection between, 1840 and 1865, and then you move up, what's the connection between this? The repetition, right, makes the link that makes the past part of the present. These are not unconnected elements. If there's a belief that Sutton has, is that things are not connected. Black women are not connected to white women in any way. But if there's a belief that Faulkner has, is that things are connected, and acts you commit in one day has its consequences in another day. And black women and white women are connected. They've got a heck of a lot in common. They all have to endure black and white men, right? But Sutton doesn't believe that. And so you see Quentin facing some facts that are going to drive him to suicide. On page 261. Don't say, it's just me that sounds like your old man, Shreve said. Go on. Stop at the children. Go on. Yes, Quentin said. The two children thinking, yes. Maybe we are both father. Shreve just said, you sound like your dad. Maybe nothing ever happens once and is finished. Maybe happen is never once, but like ripples maybe on water after the pebble sinks. The ripples moving on, spreading. The pool attached by a narrow umbilical water cord to the next pool, which the first pool feeds, has fed, did feed. Let this second pool contain a different temperature of water, a different molecularity of having seen, felt, remembered, reflected in a different tone, the infinite, unchanging sky. It doesn't matter. That pebble's watery echo, whose fall it did not even see, moves across its surface too, at the original ripple space, to the old ineradicable rhythm, thinking, yes, we are both father, or maybe father and I are both Shreve. Maybe it took father and me to make Shreve, or Shreve and me both to make father. Or maybe father, or maybe Thomas Sutton. To make all of us. And you're reminded when you read it that you read the book in the context of the other Faulkner novels that Quentin is a family man, a family boy. His father is an important figure in the series, and his grandfather, who was Colonel General Thompson, is part and parcel of this. Why does Thomas Sutton connect himself to General Thompson, who's not a visible figure in this novel, but is referred to, is to get that connection with family and the consequences of family. And so Quentin is feeling this. You may say, I am my own puddle with my own molecular structure, but if somebody throws a rock over there, it pushes and pushes and pushes. And if you're sensitive, as he is, it has consequences. 277, here are the consequences coming forward. So he got his choice made after all, Shreve said. He played that trump after all, and so he came home and found, wait, what he must have wanted to find, or anyway, what he was going to wait, I tell you, Quentin said, though still he did not move or even raise his voice, that voice with its tense, suffused, restrained quality. I am telling, am I going to have to hear it all again? No. I am going to have to hear it all over again. I am already hearing it all over again. I am listening to it all over again. I shall have to never listen to anything else but this again forever. So apparently not only a man never outlives his father, but not even his friends, acquaintances do. He's used almost every permutation of the verb paradigm you can, right? I heard, I will hear, I shall have heard, right? Goes right through the paradigm. There's no freedom for Quentin. You can go to Cambridge, but you can't leave Mississippi. And I think that's a terrible moment in the novel when Quentin has been trying to tell a story. Okay, tell me about the South. What's it like? All right, I'll tell you about the South. All over again. You see, what Bond needed was what you can't have, which is love and a sense of generation, connections. It's referred to in terms of bond in 316, 318. If I can find a place here. That is why it did not matter about 2/3 of the way down to either of them which one did the talking, since it was not talking alone which did it, performed, and accomplished the overpassing, but some happy marriage of speaking and hearing, wherein each before the demand, the requirement, forgave, condoned, forgot the faulting of the other. That's a nice relationship indeed. That's what we desire. Faulting both in the creating of this shade whom they discussed, rather existed in, and in the hearing and sifting and discarding the false and conserving what seemed true, or fit the preconceived, in order to overpass to love, where they might be paradox and inconsistency, but nothing false, nor false, and now love. He must have known all about her before he ever saw her, what she looked like, her private hours in that provincial woman's world that every man of the family were not supposed to know a great deal about. He must have learned it without even having to ask a single question. A little bit. And then maybe, yes, maybe who could know what times he looked at Henry's face and thought, not there but for the intervening leaven of that blood which we do not have in common is my skull, my brow, socket, shape, angle of jaw and chin, some of my thinking behind it, and which he could see in my face. In his turn, if he but knew to look as I know, but there, just behind a little, obscured a little by that alien blood, whose admixing was necessary in order that he exist, is the face of the man who shaped us both out of that blind, chancy darkness, what he called the future. There, at any moment, second, I shall penetrate by something of will and intensity and dreadful need and strip that alien leavening from it and look not on my brother's face whom I did not know, I possessed and hence never missed, but my father's, out of the shadow of whose absence my spirit's posthumanity has never escaped. Thinking, what cannot I do with this willing flesh and bone by which this flesh and bone and spirit which stems from the same source that mine did, but which sprang in quiet peace and contentment, and ran in steady, even though monotonous sunlight. Next page. What can I do as he sees his blood? So at last I shall see him, whom it seems I was bred up never to expect to see, whom I had even learned to live without. He would know, for sure, forever, thinking, that's all I want. He need not even acknowledge me. I will let him understand just as quickly that he need not do that I do not expect that, will not be hurt by that, just as he will let me know that quickly I am his son. Thinking, maybe again with that expression you might call smiling, which was not, which was just something that even just a clodhopper bastard was not intended to see beyond. I am my mother's son, at least. I do not seem to know what I want either, because he knew exactly what he wanted. It was just the same, like a physical touch, even though in secret, hidden. The living touch of that flesh warmed before he was born by the same blood which it had bequeathed to him to warm his own flesh with, to be bequeathed by him in turn, to run hot and loud with veins and limbs after that first flesh and then his own were dead. You see, Bond wants exactly what Thomas Sutton wants. Right? Generation. You are my son. Right? You are my son. And with it, he has to have love. But Thomas Sutton doesn't understand that love goes with it. Bond's great need to be acknowledged. Doesn't even have to say it out loud. Just between me and him. Right? Quietly in the light. I'll go away forever. Love and generation. Sutton wants only generation. That's why he's such a ferocious lecher. It's the only thing that drives him there. So you move to the end of the novel. And you see that Quentin Compson, as he faces Shreve's continuing pressure, is coming to understand, I think, the secret of Charles Bond and what Charles Bond does, and then the horrendous consequence of Thomas Sutton and what he does. And that what Charles Bond desires is something he can't have. The family, the Compson family is a family with serious problems, if you know the rest of Faulkner. Quentin and his sister and his parents are not evil people, but they're people who do not relate in a way which would support any generation is available to you. That is, they're not evil people, but a lot of families do not have supportive love and recognition. And Mr. Thompson is a good man. Quentin is too, but Quentin has carried himself in his inside, in his interior, beyond the Quentin Thompson family and what good it can offer to the South. Being a Southerner becomes more meaningful than being a Thompson. So since the family was weak in the first place, Quentin's in serious trouble when he sees what there is outside of the family. I'm not sure I'm making sense of what I'm saying to you, but do you catch the point I'm making? And at the end of the novel, Shreve is pushing this even further. 361. Shreve comments on this as you move to the end of the novel. And he points out something which Quentin can't do anything about, which is that there is a world outside of the South. Alberta is that world. And it's totally unavailable to Quentin and the pressure that he has from the inside. I don't know. I can't help it. I feel fine. All right. But let me know if you want to quote Jesus. This is Shreve. If I was going to have to spend 9 months in this climate, I would sure hate to have come from the South. Maybe I wouldn't come from the South anyway, even if I could stay there. Wait, listen. I'm not trying to be funny, smart. I just want to understand it if I can, and I don't know how to say it better, because it's something my people haven't got. Or if we have got it, it all happened long ago across the water, and so now there ain't anything to look at every day to remind us of it. We don't live among defeated grandfathers and freed slaves. Or have I got it backwards? Was it your folks that are free and the niggers got lost? And bullets in the dining room table and such, to be always reminding us to never forget. Do I have to do it all over again? What is it? Something you live and breathe in like air, like hysteria. That horrible, oppressive, sweet-smelling flower which is everywhere you turn. A kind of vacuum, something with rage-like and indomitable anger and pride and glory and in happenings that occurred and ceased 50 years ago. A kind of entailed birthright, father and son of never forgiving General Sherman, so that forevermore, as long as your children's children produce children, you won't be anything but a descendant of a long line of colonels killed in Pickett's charge at Manassas. Gettysburg. It's instinct, isn't it? You can't understand it. You have to be born there. Would I then? Do you understand it? I don't know. Yes, of course I understand it. I don't know. Yes, you don't know. You don't even know about the old name, Rosa. Well, you notice that right here we get to pick up the very last page, right? Do you understand it? Yes, I understand it. Well, I don't know if I do understand it. You can't say goodbye to something you don't understand. This is what essay of Quentin's dilemma. If he could understand it, he could put it away, couldn't he? But because it's part of his interior being, it's with him permanently, and he can't step aside to look at it and define it the way Shreve can step aside and look. And we get to this last page of the novel. Page 377. I am older at 20 than a lot of people who have died, Quentin said. And more people have died than have been 21, Shreve said. Now he, Quentin, could read it, could finish it. The sloped, whimsical, ironic hand out of Mississippi, attenuated into the iron snow. Or perhaps there is. Surely it can harm no one to believe that perhaps she has escaped not at all the privilege of being outraged and amazed and of not forgiving, but on the contrary has herself gained that place or born where the objects of outrage and of the commiseration also are no longer ghosts but are actual people, to be actual recipients of hatred and the pity. It will do no harm to hope. You see, I've written hope, not think. So let it be hope. That the one cannot escape the censure which no doubt he deserves. This is, of course, after the tragedy of the fall and Culbert. That the other no longer lack the commiseration which, let us hope, while we are hoping, that they have longed for. If only for the reason that they are about to receive it, whether they will or no. The weather was beautiful, though cold, and they had to use picks to break the Yet in one of the deeper clods I saw a red worm, doubtless alive when the clod was thrown up, so by afternoon it was frozen again. So it took Charles Bond and his mother to get rid of old Tom, and Charles Bond and the Angeroon to get rid of Judith, and Charles Bond and Clyde to get rid of Henry, and Charles Bond's mother and Charles Bond's grandmother got rid of Charles Bond. So it takes two niggers to get rid of one Sutton, don't it? Quentin did not answer. Evidently, Shreve did not want an answer now. He continued almost without a pause. Which is all right. It's fine. It clears the whole ledger. You can tear all the pages out and burn them except for one thing. And you know what that is? Perhaps he hoped for an answer this time, or perhaps he really paused for emphasis. Because he got no answer. You've got one nigger left. One nigger Sutton left. Of course, you can't catch him, and you don't even always see him, and you never will be able to use him. But you got him there still. You still hear him at night sometimes, don't you? Yes. And so, do you know what I think? No. Do you know what I think? No. Then I'll tell you. I think that in time the Jim Bonds are going to conquer the Western Hemisphere. Of course, it won't be quite in our time, but of course they spread toward the poles. They will bleach out again like rabbits and birds do, so they won't show up so sharp against the snow. But it will still be Jim Bonds. And so in a few thousand years, I who regard you will also have sprung from the loins of African kings. Now I want you to tell me just one thing more. Why do you hate the South? I don't hate it, Quentin said quickly, at once, immediately. I don't hate it. He said, I don't hate it. And in the cold air, the iron New England dark. I don't hate it. I don't hate it. He ought to hate it. Why doesn't he hate it? He's a Southerner. Every Southerner I know loves the South. And people who hate the South love the South. Now, I know all my Southern friends are people who left the South and wouldn't go back in a bet. But you know, they never give up their past. I don't talk about being Wisconsinite the way they talk about being Southerners. Have you noticed this? And they keep their accent as long as they can and talk about their nannies and their, but they love it. And I don't, for me, the South, I avoid the South. You couldn't get me to go through Texas to Cajun. I don't want to be around that part of the century, the country. But they love it.
Well, why, if he recognized that he was part of the South and didn't hate it, why did he commit suicide?
That's exactly the question I'm going to ask. It's right after this, the pressure of this novel that he kills himself. He can no longer take it anymore. Why does he kill himself? He doesn't die in this novel. He dies right after the novel. I'm not sure. I can't recall reading his exact death per se. Did Faulkner write a description of the death itself?
Yes.
Is
It's in
it in Sound of the Fury?
the Sound of the Fury.
Yeah, maybe it is. It's been a while since I read the book. But the death per se of Quentin is not that important. I mean, that's the consequence of all this. But why? Why? Why, when you finish reading this book, do you feel as though you have been tied tightly with string, and that all of your interior flesh and soul is wanting to burst out the way Quentin's does?
And he can't free himself.
From
Mississippi, from all of it, from Aunt Rosa and Sutpen and Judith and Charles Bond and all of it.
Yeah, Shreve is wrong, isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, Shreve does not understand. It was all done 50 years ago, so what the heck, right? I don't feel any guilt being a Wisconsinite, I don't feel that. People still come to me and say, well, what's your share in the guilt of the slaughter, the white people have done to blacks? Well, I never had my ancestors came from Norway in 1855 when they were slaves, right? They left Norway. They were poor tenant farmer type people. What am I supposed to do about it?
But you can live with that comfortably, see.
That's right, because I was on the right side of it. You can't in the South.
The South can't.
In the South,
I visited
yeah.
Atlanta with a friend. There's a huge diorama of the battle.
Yeah.
Her very religious, my friend, aunt said, spit in Sherman's eye when you get there.
Is that right?
And we've been to church
Yeah.
all barney.
After all these years? After all these years?
Yes.
When I came out of that, seeing that diagram, it was, after, it was, the novel that was on the.
Gone with the Wind?
Yes, Gone with the Wind. I came out saying, damn the Yankees.
But
Well,
I
it's
think
that
this
damn
novel
sweet South
exposes
now.
some of the
Double
very bad
sweets.
values of the South, but as Quentin, he must see them too.
Well, that's the problem right there. That is Quentin's difficulty is that he is not a, he's not a, how was I say, not a he is a dyed-in-the-wool Southerner, but he's a 20th century man with perceptions that have brought him out of the interior of the South to make it possible for him to look at the South and realize that it's inside himself. It's self-loathing. It's self-loathing. He should never have left Mississippi, should he?
He could have survived in the South.
He could have survived with a different father, a different family, all of which combined